Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller. Every week, I chat with fascinating people from all walks of life in order to bring you knowledge, inspiration, and insight. If you enjoy the show, you can support it by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend. This is the Jeremy Miller Podcast. All right, Dino Verrelli, welcome to the podcast, man. Super excited to chat today.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm excited to be on your podcast, which is a little bit different for me because usually I am the host. So I always love it when I'm on other people's podcasts. It's awesome.
Do you think you prefer being the host, or do you prefer going on to other people's?
I love to talk, so I think I'm going to say I like going on other people. And like being a host, I mean, we've been doing a podcast for almost, it's like, 6+ years. I think we're almost at year 7 as we go into 24. So for someone who, that was really hard. That was like probably the hardest lesson that I had to learn early on was like, just like listen and not talk, right? Let your guests talk more than you do. And it takes time and practice, but to answer your question, I love, sharing the story. That's gets me excited. So I like being on other people's podcasts to kind of share the journey and share the mission of what we're doing.
I love that. Yeah, it's there's pros and cons to both. I feel like as the host, you have some pressure because you got to keep the conversation engaging, kind of be the captain of the conversation, but being able to listen at the same time. But then it's also kind of easy. Like you just get to talk about yourself as the guest. Like it's easy to tell your own story, but you also got to make sure you're providing value. And yeah, I don't know. I like both of them. But anyways, I'm super excited to dive into everything Dino today, everything Project Purple. I really want to hear, I know it's a big question, but I really just want to hear the full story of Project Purple, the origins of it, the inspirations, everything that's kind of gone into what you guys have built today. Take as long as you need. I know it's a big question.
Man, that's a loaded question. And there's so many, like I was thinking about, like, cause I got your email yesterday and I was like thinking about it this morning. So I started to swim, cause I'm battling through an Achilles injury right now. And, I was like swimming and I'm an awful swimmer, man. So this is like, I'm like digging really deep into my uncomfortable zone. And so I gotta laugh about this. Like I can only do, like, I could do like the backstroke really good. So I was like on my back a lot today in the pool and I was just staring up at the ceiling trying to like, not drown. But then I was like thinking about, oh man, like I remember I got that podcast today with Jeremy, like where am I going to go with this? So this is a great segue. So I had like 30 minutes in the pool to think about this, I guess is my point here in sharing that story. But
swimming is so meditative. I love swimming.
Ah, man, like really, like seriously, like I've done it twice now in the last week, and it almost is like so crazy. It kind of brings me back a little bit to like those early days of running and why I loved running so much. So, I hated running. Like I've said this multiple times. I hated running. I played collegiate basketball a long time ago, almost 25 years ago. And coming out of college, I still was very active in basketball. I actually got into refereeing at a high level here in New England for high school, did some college, kind of floated around. And then kind of realized like, hey, like I started a family with my wife. I had 2 young boys under 5 and, refereeing just wasn't going to be what I saw in like my advocation in terms of my free time. And then at the same time, I had my own insurance brokerage. So that got really busy, started to get really successful with that. Left corporate America like in 2005 and things were rocking and rolling. And so I wasn't running. I was just going to the gym, still pretty active in basketball. Like I was still playing quite a bit in some adult leagues. And then December of '08, my dad gets this diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And I was just, floored to say the least. My parents were immigrants. My mom and dad came to this country in 1968. They landed in the Bronx. They moved up to Connecticut in 1970 to start a family. My brother
Where'd they move from?
From Italy in a province called Frosinone, which is about an hour and 20 minutes south of Rome. So I like to
Oh
tell
wow.
people, some people say, "Oh, that's like southern Italy." I'm like, "Nah, it's really like central Italy. It's really between Rome and Naples, if you know geography of Italy." And most people consider like Naples like the start of the south of Italy. But Naples, from my family's village, and my mom and dad were from two neighboring villages, is only about 90 minutes. So again, we're about an hour 20 to Rome and about 90 minutes down to Naples. So I like to say like kind of we're in between, but we're more centrally located. And so they came here in 68. They started a career. My dad was a laborer, my mom was a seamstress, and then a factory. And then they decided to start a family once they moved to Connecticut in 1970. I have an older brother. So my brother was born in 70. I was born in 74. And my mom and dad, both at about the eighth grade, stopped going to school. And the reason being is they had to work the family farms. They both came from farming families, and back in the 50s and 60s, that was a way of life. It's so kind of crazy now. It's like put a kid on a farm, like take a kid out of school. Like you can't do that. It's illegal in the United States, right? Like, but then you think about like all these immigrants and what they did, and it's just really wild. And like even today, it's like, whoa, like, how many people actually forage food for them all themselves, right? Like whether it's chickens or cows or pork, like even vegetables, right? Like nobody really does that. We rely so much on like our supermarket
Yeah.
and our supply chains. But in Italy, back again in the 50s and 60s, like you ate off the land, like you made everything. So that was just a way of life. And so when my parents came to America, clearly they wanted a better life for their kids. And for my brother and I, growing up in the late 70s into the 80s, Connecticut was changing a lot. The inner city schools was kind of like a tough place to be for a Caucasian, kid. And so I think part of it was a little bit of that, where there was a lot of like, I guess, like a lot of shenanigans happening in public schools, but also my family was also deeply rooted in the Roman Catholic faith. So I was parochial school kid, from pre-K all the way up through, high school, so through the 12th grade. And that's not free, right? Like, we had to pay for that. My parents had to pay for that. So my mom and my dad put my brother and I, through parochial school through 12 years and, made sacrifices. We didn't come from a lot. My dad, as I said, was a laborer. He's probably making minimum wage, but working, 60 to 80 hours a week. My mom, again, a seamstress, again, making minimum wage. You look back, like it's kind of crazy, like, now with inflation and just with certain parts of the country are just so freaking expensive to live in. You could do that back then, right? Like think about it. Like today, to say to a family, like, all right, you're both going to make minimum wage, working whatever job and be able to afford like, a house and be able to afford a car and be able to, put food on the table. It's just so wild, but they figured it out, right? Like my parents figured it out, and my mom and dad gave my brother and I every opportunity we could ever imagine. Like we didn't go on vacation every year, and I don't think that was a money thing. I think it was more like a cultural thing, like Italians,
Mm.
and as I've you know met so many people, that I not only the people I grew up with that were in that same kind of boat, but other people as I've learned through life. Italians, these immigrants that came over, like for some of them, vacation wasn't like a big thing. Vacation was like, a week off of work and like just hanging out with the family, I guess.
Right.
And so we took very little vacations, my 16 years of life. But the vacations that we did take, so this is the flip side of this, Jeremy, is like we'd go to Italy for like 3 months, but like that wasn't really a vacation because you're just going back to Italy to see family,
Right.
or you're going to Albany or Toronto to see an aunt and an uncle and spending, 4 or 5 days. I remember I can't remember how old I was. I was probably like 8 or 9. We did this trek all the way up to, Toronto, Canada to see my uncle, and then we went over to Montreal to see cousins. So was that a vacation? I mean, yeah, if you think about it, yeah, that was, but back then it was just seeing family, and staying with family.
Right.
It wasn't like we were in a hotel room getting takeout, going on rides. It was more of like, hey, we're going to hang out with family. So that's kind of what we did, right? And same thing with Italy. Like I was really blessed as a young child to go to Italy to go see my grandfather, go see my aunt, my uncle. Again, we weren't like going sightseeing. We were just going straight back to the village where my parents were from. But so that was kind of life, right? And that was life for me. And, I look back, as I became a parent, I'll fast forward a little bit, I started to really appreciate my mom and dad. Growing up, I had a lot of friends that I went to grammar school with in high school that were a lot like me, whether they were Portuguese, Greek, or Italian. They had immigrant parents, so that we found a lot of commonality in that, or Jamaican even. Like I had many Jamaican friends that again their parents were immigrants, so everything was kind of brand new, or we kind of all looked and did similar things. When I went to college, that's when I was like blown away. I was like, wow, man,
Mm.
like, you guys go on vacation, for your holidays, what, you don't get together as like a family of 50 to celebrate Christmas. And like I didn't have many sleepovers growing up, that we just didn't do that, and, I think my first sleepover was actually going to college. That was like the first time I ever slept outside of my bed, at my house, and so it's just like little things like that. But again, as you become a parent, you just like appreciate like, where you came from, what you've able to achieve, and the influence that your parents or those loved ones in your life like really kind of guided you through those tough times and those good times. And so, my dad gets his cancer diagnosis and I was just like floored, man. And cancer wasn't foreign to our family. My grandfather had passed away years before that from colon cancer. My mom had had breast cancer. My aunt had had cancers, before that. So cancers again weren't foreign to us as a family in terms of people in the family getting cancer, but this cancer in particular, pancreatic cancer, was really really foreign. And naturally one of the first things that I did was go online and look and see like what this is about. I knew something about it because of Steve Jobs and Michael Landon, which were two real famous people that had experienced pancreatic cancer
Yeah.
before my dad.
I just read the Steve Jobs biography.
Yeah, I've never read it, but like fast, I know somewhat of his story. It's just super fascinating, and I think hindsight's always 2020. Maybe he should have had surgery because I know he was a big proponent of not doing surgery and following
Right.
some kind of Western medicine or Eastern medicine, I should say. In terms of going unconventional versus having surgery, and he might still be here if possibly. No one knows.
Yeah, I highly recommend that book. I've been kind of obsessed with it ever since I read it. Just obsessed with Steve Jobs and his life, and like the whole last chunk of the book is all about his cancer and like just how it ate away at him. And he was kind of stubborn and like I don't want surgery. I think he did have a couple surgeries here or there, um, but it just kept coming back, and he delayed everything so far to the point where like he kind of forced himself into getting surgery because it was already past that point of no return, really. And then at that point, the surgery just couldn't do much, anyways, unfortunately. But I would definitely recommend that book. It's even outside of the whole cancer part of it. It's a really good book.
Yeah, he was really a visionary, right? Like if you think about like over the last like 30 years, like what Apple has become and the vision that he had and everything he poured into that, right? Is just really wild. And it's kind of I think it's hard as society, like, and this is where, not to digress, but talk a little bit like, what we do here. And I always have said like everyone's journey with this disease is different. So for us to kind of sit here and judge, and even for me to make that statement, like, hey, like, he could have had surgery and maybe he would be here, I guess statistically we could say that, but we weren't in his shoes, right? Like everyone's story and everyone's journey and everyone where they are in life is totally different. So, maybe he felt like, he had the best advice to not do that, and that's okay, right? Clearly hindsight of course is always 2020, right? And it's easy to
Yeah.
be the couch quarterback and say, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that, but you're not in that person's shoes. And I've always said we kind of have to respect those decisions, because there's many times when people come to us now and we recommend second opinions, or we say certain things like you should do X, Y, and Z because of what we know and the knowledge that we have. And sometimes people do, and sometimes people don't. And there's no right or wrong to that, right? And there shouldn't be, I guess is my point.
Right.
And that, that was a little bit, even with my dad, right? So I look back on my dad's journey. So he gets diagnosed in December of '08. It's gut wrenching. It hits me like a ton of bricks.
Was he
And
generally pretty healthy, like outside of that?
super healthy, man. Super healthy. He was a laborer, man. He slung bricks, and he was a fit 165 pounds. He was a shorter guy. I'm 6'1". He was about 5'6", 5'7". But he was, built like a brick shit house, to use an analogy. Like, he was a tough dude, man. Even at his age, when the year prior, he started to slow down because I think, again, hindsight being 2020, he was misdiagnosed for about 8 months prior to that. He had a lot of health issues starting to creep up. Just it was the cancer, but it was everything else other than the cancer from a diagnostic standpoint. They removed his gallbladder. They said he had gout. They said it was his diet. And then finally, it showed up on a scan. Someone decided to do like a PT scan and a PET scan, and they found the tumor in his pancreas. So, there were so many things, but prior to him being that sick that year prior, he was still very active. He was still working, man. He retired from his union job at 62, but he was still working 5 years post that, just working with various guys on the side. So, like, he really stopped working like hard labor at like 67. And the crazy thing, and this is a story I haven't shared with many. So our first house that we bought in 2001, my wife and I, like, my dad and I totally gutted it from top to bottom, for over 3 years. So from, 2001 to 2004, 2005, like, we were so active. So I look back, like, that was only 4 years before, we were still doing, and then we moved into a new house. I have stone walls. Go figure, an Italian with stone walls at his house, right? That's a joke. But so I have like 4 or 5 these massive, massive, massive stone walls, and we literally, like, my dad and I, when we moved into this new house in 2005, over 2 years we built these stone walls, man. It was just insane, So even at that, so that brings us into like 2007, So he was still slinging brick and, doing stuff all the way through, like,
Wow.
2007. And then, like, when 2008 rolled around, that's like when things started to kind of fall off a bit. And, then we got this diagnosis in December of '08. But, back to the story here, like, I hated running. Absolutely despised it, man. My wife was the runner. And there was just nothing that I enjoyed about it. Even going back, I look back at my college days, my senior year, we got a new coach, and he was really big into conditioning, and we had to like run like a mile under like 5 minutes. And like, that was like the most miserable experience ever in my life, trying to run like a sub 5 mile just to make the team. I mean, we figured it out. We did it. But it was just miserable, man. It was just miserable. So I just, through those years, of young adulthood, becoming a parent, like, I just never thought about running, never wanted to do it. And then my dad gets this diagnosis. And at the time, I was working out at a local gym, like super early in the morning. I had my business. I had 5 employees I was managing. I had 2 young kids under 5. And a marriage. And then my dad gets this diagnosis. So my workout group was like, one morning, they were like, hey, let's just go for, like, let's start running. Cause I don't know, there was like some sort of challenge, I think, at the gym, or cardio challenge. And all right, so we start running outside. And I remember, so this was, early 2009, um, right after my dad had got his diagnosis. And my dad had a surgery. He was eligible for the Whipple. So December, he was mostly in recovery mode. So this was like January '09. And, being in New England, being in Connecticut, it's freaking cold early in the morning, going out at 5 o'clock in the morning, pitch black. And, there's no lights. We're in the suburban area. You're dodging skunks and raccoons and squirrels early in the morning. And I just remember that, like, first run was like a mile. It was nothing. And it was like a cakewalk run. And I just remember coming back and I was like, oh man, like this feels awesome. And I was like, oh, I think I could do this for my dad. Like today, I think I could help my dad out, doing this. And so it's just started to click. Like the running to me,
Mm.
like it went from this thing that I hated, it sucked, I didn't enjoy it, didn't want to do it, to like, hey, like this is really cool, man. And like, whoa, like my thoughts are clear. Like I was like, all right, I got work, I got family, I got my dad. And so the running started to increase. My dad started his treatments. And during the same time, I sat down with my wife, my brother, his wife, and my mom and dad. And I said, all right, hey, like I run my own business. I have 5 employees. I'm going to be the chauffeur. Like I'll go to everything. And all I'm going to do is just drive mom and dad and naturally go into the appointments, but I'm just going to be there. And so I made that decision, with the family, that I would do that. My brother had a full-time job working for like a Fortune 500 company. He didn't really have the flexibility. My wife was a school teacher. My sister-in-law is a physical therapist, or occupational therapist, I should say. So she didn't have that flexibility. So I was like, hey, I'll do it, and it'll just help out, with mom and dad. Not that they didn't understand anything, but as I look back, hindsight being 2020, it was like the best thing. And I advocate to people, whether they're watching or listening, if you have someone who's going through a cancer journey, it's great to have a third set of eyes, because you see things from a different perspective. You have a different lens. You're not worried about, it's not your spouse. And I always kind of tell this, like, my dad was worrying about my mom was worrying about my dad, and I was just able to kind of listen to everything, but also see
Mm.
things, right? And that was so powerful as I look back at the creation of Project Purple, and what I eventually decided to do. There was a lot of inspiration during that time, not only from my dad, right, but also from just seeing things from that different perspective and that different lens. So
What
saw
do
a
you mean
lot.
by that? Like what things do you think you were able to see that you might not otherwise would have been? Like if you were, more like in your mom's position, for example.
Yeah, well, there's cracks in the system. Like our healthcare system is like a disaster. And
Yeah.
I just realized, like, hey, if you don't know, like it's a don't ask, don't like, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, I'm not trying to like say like people are doing this purposely, but if you don't know what to ask for, they're not going to give it to you. And because the system is so overwhelmed, and there's insurance, and there's, you know, the way that doctors and nurses are compensated, there's certain things that they just don't. It's not like they give you a laundry list of, like, it's not like going to, like, I went and had tacos yesterday at this taco place, and it was all like a la carte. Like you check off what you want and how you want it. That's not how cancer treatment works. Like you sit in the chair and they tell you this is how it's going to go. And then you either say, do you, and the doctors and nurses say, do you have any questions? And most people have a shit ton of questions, but don't feel comfortable asking them sometimes, or don't know what to ask for. And so I just saw that. And my mom is like, my mom is the rock of the family. Like my dad was very quiet. My mom, like, she spoke her mind, and so she would go after the doctors and nurses, not in a negative, like, nasty way. She would just ask a lot of questions. So I would see that, like, sitting there and go, Mom, like, shut up, shut up. And she's like, no, I'm not going to shut up. Like, you got to advocate for yourself. Like, no one's going to advocate for daddy. And I was like, after the first couple appointments, I was like, hey man, I'm just sitting here, I'm just going to let this ride, and I'm just going to see what happens. And there were times when I was like, hey, wait a minute, you didn't answer my mom's question. Like, can we go back to that? Like, I'd
Mm.
have to jump in. And so that's kind of, I think, where, being that third person, like, you're not so much emotionally, like, involved, because, like, it's not your
Right.
loved one that's going through it, or you that are going through it. And you can just see things. And then there were other things that I saw, Jeremy, like with other patients. Like, I was there to support my dad, but like I would see, like, for example, and I've shared this example many times. My dad was doing chemotherapy, and usually, in a lot of these settings, there's 4 people to a room. They call them pods. There's some sort of number. It's like 3, 6, 4, 8, depending on the size. Usually they like them smaller just because it's more private, intimate, and just makes for a better experience, right? Like no one wants to go do chemotherapy, and it's just a nasty place to be. So we were in a pod or a quad, and for us when we used to do chemotherapy, I'll back up for a second. My mom, this was like a pilgrimage. The night before, my mom's making cookies to eat for us and for the staff. She's making chicken cutlet sandwiches. She's making lunch in the morning or at night. She's bottling her own water, drinks, and everything. My mom was so superstitious. Like she did, and I get it. Like some of the food's not as nutritious like at the hospital, right? So they, you come
Yeah.
in and they give you a menu, and we would just say like, hey, we're good. We got everything covered. Um, and so we were kind of the party. Like the nurses when we came would love seeing my dad on the schedule because they knew they were getting like fresh batch of Italian cookies, which is insane, right? So and then naturally we would bring lots of food and stuff because when my dad was doing chemo, he was there for about 9. It could go anywhere from 8 to 10 hours, so it was a long day.
Jeez.
So I just remember like so this one incident. We're there. We're getting to know everyone. My dad's getting settled in, and we're talk. You usually talk to the other people, right? Like and sometimes you're in there with people who have the same disease, which is cool because you could, the patients can talk about it, the caregivers can, you have this common bond, right? And I noticed like one of the chairs was open about a half hour in to my dad's treatment. This guy comes walking in. Now he's got like a styrofoam container, a Coca-Cola, and he looks at the time like I was, late 30s. He looks like he's about as old as my dad. And he sits down and the nurses are getting him set up and he's like, I'm so sorry. And he goes, I had to take the bus. I couldn't get a ride here, and apologize like something was up with the bus. And he opens up the container and it's like Chinese food and he's got the Coke. And now I look over and I'm like, we got a picnic basket with chicken cutlets. The chickens were probably killed on Friday. This is a Monday. My mom made the sandwiches in the morning. We got water from water filtration from our house, from my parents' house. And, my dad got driven here by me, as his chauffeur. And this guy's coming off a bus coming, and eating Chinese food, which, my mom would never allow us to, have like they had all these food trucks outside of Yale. So he probably got it at one of the food trucks, like have any of that vendor food. And he's drinking a Coke. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Now, hindsight being 2020, the transportation thing's nuts to me. And that's I've never been able to like find justification for that. The Chinese food was probably what he can stomach and its calories, right? Like, and it's high dense calories, right? So that was probably really good for him. But here I am thinking like, hey, my dad's got fresh chicken cutlets. Like, how can this be, right? The Coke, I was at that point, I'm thinking like, that's disgusting. That's all he can afford. But again, now knowing what I know now, like that settles a lot of people's stomach. And with chemo, you get
Mm.
nauseous. The guy ended up being my age and he
Oh
had
wow.
he had brain cancer. He had a glioblastoma, and right then and there, I was like, man, this is effed up. Like this is not right. But so seeing things from that, like my mom wasn't paying attention. Like I would see things like that, Jeremy, where I'm like, how can anyone who's fighting cancer take a city bus? Like that's wrong. Like that should not happen. Like people should have resources. How could this person who again battling cancer be eating that food, right? Or drinking the Coke? And I'm like that's just not right, man. And so that was like one of the stories I look back on. I was like, you know what? This whole cancer community needs help. And then you start looking at like the disease specific and pancreatic cancer, and clearly my dad was this inspiration, right? He's always been the biggest inspiration for me for what we've done here. But you look at the numbers and dollars and cents. I'm an entrepreneur. I've always looked at the numbers and dollars and cents in anything that I get involved in, and there just was no money in it. There was little funding, and that's why we don't have early detection. We don't have curative treatments. 1 in 5 are operable because we don't have early detection because most cases are detected, at stage 4, which means they're unoperable. So
Yes.
I was just like, hey, like, there were other things that happened with the system, like for us trying to find like a specialist in pancreatic cancer. We at the time, my parents lived 20 minutes from Yale, was like finding a needle in the haystack. Now, the one benefit, fast forward 13 years, there are more specialists in this disease, but the disease has progressed. So I think, it's kind of like they're following the money, right? Like there's a lot of money now in GI cancer. So clearly there's now more specialists. 13 years ago, that wasn't the case. And so that was kind of part of the frustration. I remember being at one of the meetings and I'm like, they were talking about like how, so for my dad, he had surgery, did chemotherapy. 6 months later, after the chemo, they were like, all right, you're good, no evidence of disease. And then in 2010, the cancer came back. And they were like, it's
Mm.
stage 4. But I was like, like at the time, like I had an iPhone and I'm like, I'm doing my emails. I'm doing all this. What do you mean? Like this cancer's back. Like we can't beat this thing. So, there was just like all these little things along the way. And at the same time, I started to run a lot, again, given what was happening in my world. And the running just became so special to me, man. Like I'd go out and at the very beginning, it was like a 1 mile run, 2 mile run. And I remember we were out on this run one morning. And at that time, we were doing like 5Ks. And again, it was super positive. I was feeling good. I was like having really clear thoughts. And one of my run friends was like, "Hey, why don't we do?" And this was when my dad's cancer came back. So this was like 2010 in like April. And they said, "Why don't we do a 10K or a 5K for your dad, and we'll give the money to Yale." And I was like, you know what? That sounds great, but I think we could have more impact. I think if we do our own thing, and I actually there's a anecdotal story that goes with this. Around that same time, I had met with the folks at Yale, the development folks, and I said, "Hey, like, I want to give you guys $5,000. Can we put it towards research?" And they're like, "No." And I was like so pissed
Mm.
off at that time. Now, hindsight being 2020, what I know now, like to give a restricted gift, like to say like, "Hey, $10,000 or $20,000, I want it to go all towards the researcher, this person." Most places and even us, like it's a $75,000 minimum to do that because the accounting that's involved, like you got to
Mm.
ensure that like all that money goes towards that person or that project, right? So I can see from Yale's perspective, like, they've got $1 billion endowment, they've got like, they get, multiple 7-figure gifts a year from various donors, but they're restricted, right? And that was kind of part of
Yeah.
like, there was something
Mm.
a couple years back. I think when COVID happened, they were talking about how these schools were losing money, and they called out like these Ivy League schools for their massive endowments. And there was a great article, I forget where it was, but it said like a lot of the gifts are restricted. And there's a reason why they're restricted because they're specific in scope, but there are minimums to that, right? And now running a charity, like we can't say to everyone who wants to donate, and I'm not saying like $1,000 is a lot of money, but even $5,000 is a lot of money. But to put restrictions, just think about it. Like if everyone gave $1,000 and everyone wanted that restricted, you need like a staff of like 20 to kind of follow and make sure that
Right.
that is actually the case. But as I look back on that, like that interaction that I had with that person didn't do anything wrong. She was doing her job. Was part of my inspiration to say, hey, like, hey, they don't want my 5,000. Screw it. I'm going to do my own thing. Now, would I have done my own thing? I think so, but that was kind of a little bit of a push. And so that's when I had this idea to start Project Purple in 2010. There's a historic race here in Connecticut, the New Haven Road Race, which is the U.S. Track and Field 20K Championship, and it's been around forever. And it was coming up on Labor Day, and I was like, you know what, this is a great opportunity as kind of 2010 kind of went through, like my dad getting diagnosed in March, having this idea like in April, May, and then I was like, all right, we got June, July, and August to make this happen. And so I was really blessed and fortunate again to have my own business at the time. So, again took a step back to care for my dad, but I kind of like moved my passion out of insurance into like philanthropy and pancreatic cancer and running, for my dad. And so we launched in September of 2010 the New Haven Road Race, which is the race that we were the first time ever. I grabbed a bunch of friends and said, "Hey, like I'm gonna buy the t-shirts. We're going to put Project Purple on the front. It's going to say my insurance company on the back because that's who's paying for them. And, who wants to run either the half marathon, the 5K, or the 20K or 5K. I think majority of people ran the 5K that day. And I think we had a group of like 27 on the lawn at the New Haven Green there, and there's this iconic picture with our old logo of us all standing there, and that was the first running event. And I wanted to use running because, again, at the time, it was like so positive for me. And when we had our first board meeting, I recruited some friends, family, strangers, to get involved that believed in like, hey, we could help people, battling this disease. And we were sitting around the boardroom, and we had this idea of like, all right, how do we raise money? Like no one came from, that was like the one thing I guess I look back, like no one was in philanthropy. They were all for-profit people. Some of them were
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, which I think was important in the early stages because you want people that have like a similar mindset and that can
Right.
build things. Like we built this, and some people were like, oh, we should do like a gala. We should do like a wine tasting. We should do this. And I was like, eh. And I was like, hey, I got this idea. And at the time, I was like getting up to like running half marathons, like training wise. I was like, what if we did 13 half marathons in 13 months and call it like the 13 and 13 campaign? And they were like, that's pretty good. Um, and I said, okay, all right. And I was really about awareness. I was like, hey, we really got to like shoot out of the cannon like right away and raise a lot of awareness. And how do we do that? So I was like, this is kind of catchy, and we could do races in different towns and different states and stuff like that. And I said, who's going to do it? And everyone like looked around, and there was like only like two or three runners, and then the other people were not runners. And there, someone, I forget who it was. Maybe it was my buddy Tony Longo, who's been on our board since day one. He was my best friend growing up, and he's like, "Man, it's your idea. I think you should run with it." So I was like, "All right, yeah, I think I could do that." So we came up with that idea. We had to like plan everything, logistics and everything, and we launched in, I think it was April of 2010, or no, 2011. And I was like, all right. So I started to do this. I kind of mapped it out. I looked at, here in New England, and I was like, this could be pretty cool. So I started to market it. And then what ended up happening, Jeremy, was as we launched that, like one of my coworkers or ex-coworkers who lives in Boston was like, hey, why don't you come up to Boston and do the Dana Farber half marathon, like the like the BAA half marathon, and it's in October. And he's like, I'll run with you. I was like, all right. And then another friend was like, hey, another guy that I knew, he's like, I'll do the Hartford half marathon with you in October, like the week before, or the week after. So what ended up happening is I ended up running like all these races, man. Like
Oh
in
wow.
that, so what ended up being like it was supposed to be 13, in 13 months. And it ended up being like I ended up running like 17 races. 17 I ended up running like 17 half marathons. I ended up getting a spot for the Boston Marathon that in 2012, 7 days before the Boston Marathon.
Oh
And
wow.
at that point, I had never run past 13 miles. And I'll never forget this. I'm at Easter dinner with my wife and kids up in the Massachusetts because my wife's from Massachusetts from the Berkshires. And we're sitting there at Easter dinner, Easter brunch. And I get the call. And I said, okay, to the person who offered me the spot. And I said, could we raise money for Project Purple, or can you could just go to pancreatic cancer, because it was for another charity. And the lady's like, yeah, we can make that happen. And I said, all right, let me get back to you. And so I remember leaned over to my wife. I said, hey, that was so and so. There's a spot in the Boston Marathon for me, but it's next Monday. She's like, it's the Boston Marathon. You got to freaking do it. And my wife's like, the family's like diehard, Boston Red Sox, Patriots. They're from Massachusetts. They live and die. Patriots Day is a big day for them. So I called the person back. I said, I'll do it. So I ended up doing the 2012 Boston Marathon. It was the hottest. I think it still might be the hottest Boston. Up until that point, it was the hottest Boston Marathon on record. I ran all the way through. I set so many PRs that day, and I ran all the way to the top of Heartbreak Hill to like mile like 21 or 22, and then ran, the next couple miles. But it was that experience that I realized, like, hey, man, I think there's something here with marathons. And we got into the New York City Marathon in 2012, so that fall, right? And then if you remember, like, New York City Marathon that year didn't go because it was Hurricane Sandy that took the race out. And so we eventually did run that. And, that just, those two experiences just grew our marathon program. And I'll back up at that first board meeting when I had that 13 and 13 idea. I was like, yeah, we'll never do marathons. Like, we'll never venture in there. Now we are, we're a major player in, the five largest world marathons. And so that was kind of the start of running. And, through the years, I just have seen, Jeremy, where, this disease, and my dad ended up dying, September of 2011. So from a year from when we started Project Purple at that race, and this is kind of a crazy story that I'll share. So the New Haven Road Race is always on Labor Day. My dad's a laborer. We started that 13 and 13, as I mentioned, like in April, and the New Haven Road Race was supposed to be one of those races. And so I was supposed to do the 20K, and we had started to build some real momentum. And one of the local TV stations, the ABC affiliate, was going to be there to film and to do B-roll and to do like a whole thing. The race knew about it. The race directors become good friends of ours, and we worked with them over the years. And so at that point in time, he like gave us a tent at the finish line, for our Project Purple runners, and we amassed a bigger team than the year before. But my dad's health really started to deteriorate in June of that year, 2011. And so he went into the hospital and never came back out until he passed. So the Friday, though, before Labor Day, I get a call from my mom, which at this point in time was pretty regular. Like, hey, your dad's not going to probably make the day. Got to come down first thing. So run down. And that would happen Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday. And so, what was routine for those last couple weeks was just being there all day. And, for me, I was just hoping my dad would pass because I know this wasn't the life that I wanted my dad to have. But so wouldn't you know, like Monday morning, I was supposed to be there on the New Haven Green with the TV crew filming, and I get a call Sunday night. Uh, it's actually like Monday morning at like 3 in the morning, and my mom's like, "Hey, you got to really come down. Like the nurses and doctors think like he's only got like an hour or two left." Hop in the car, drive down. I call one of our board members and was like, "Hey, man, I'm not making New Haven, so I don't know. Tell the TV crew like, just not gonna be there. Like, I don't know. We'll figure out the rest after." My dad passed away at like 7:10 that morning, which was kind of like the start of that race. So it's just kind of so wild how like a year ago to the day that my dad died, like we had started this thing, and he saw very little of it in the beginning, just because of the running. And we had done another event. We'd done like a dinner event at a local restaurant, like a fundraiser that he came to, and then he didn't feel good, like in May of 2011, and then he just like he went home early because he didn't feel good. So it was just kind of crazy, and my dad being a laborer too, dying on Labor Day.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of eerie, but I didn't get to run that day because of the obvious, right? And so I had to like scurry and find another race. And 2 weeks later, in Milford, Connecticut, which is another suburb here in Connecticut, not far from where I live, I saw there was a half marathon, newer half marathon. So I was like, all right, I had it run, and like I wasn't, during that time, like you're running, for anyone who runs like long distance multiple times, whether it's months or weeks, like it's kind of, it's not like a traditional buildup, right? Like you get to a point and then it's more of like recovery in between, and that's what it kind of became for
Yeah.
me. So I didn't, and now my dad dies on this Monday. There's all this the stuff, the fallout that you have to deal with that. And so for like a week, I didn't run, which was, it was what it was. And then, going into that next week, I had signed up for this other half marathon. So I was like, I didn't really run. I think I was still dealing with like the aftermath and just like lack of motivation. So I go into this next race thinking, all right, I'm just there to finish, man. And it was just one of those days. And that still is my half PR. And I'm not a fast runner, but I did like a 141 or 145. I don't even remember, but I just look back on that and I'm like, man, like my dad was totally with me that day. 2 weeks till the day, like around 2 weeks to the day that he passed, like I run my fastest half marathon ever, and so that kind of, again, like that running, it becomes so good. I lost my hero, but then here I am PRing, 2 weeks after he had passed. And it was just so awesome, just to have that high and have that positivity in my life. And that's kind of what this has become. People ask me all the time, like, what is Project Purple? And I'm like, we use endurance, and I like to use the term endurance because it has evolved into like CrossFit and fitness and other type of endurance stuffs. But this is such a negative cancer, and it's such a doom and gloom kind of cancer that getting people physically active, getting people to achieve amazing things like marathoning. Like there's less than 2% of the world population. I think if you look at it here in the US, it's like less than like half of a percent, right, that have completed a marathon.
Yeah.
And so to have that accomplishment, to put in the training and the mileage and to all that pain and suffering, because it does suck, but then to be that finisher or to achieve goals, whether it's 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 3 hours, 2.5 hours, whatever that is, but to achieve those goals and to get that medal is just so freaking special and so positive, man. Like health is wealth. And, that's the other, I think, secondary piece that we don't really think about, here is that we're improving the health of people, by getting them involved in these endurance events. It's just really amazing with the cancer that, diet and health are important, right? Like we do know like smoking causes cancer. We know that alcohol causes cancer. So like if you're going to commit to running a marathon, you can't smoke and you really can't drink that much because it's kind of counterintuitive of
Yep.
doing that, achieving those goals. So it's been really, really cool. I know that was like really long-winded, and hopefully that kind of makes sense, for me, in terms of, what this has become and how it started. It was really the inspiration of my dad and, falling in love with running and then just wanting to give that back.
Dude, thank you for sharing that. I love that. It's such a powerful story, man. And I really, I love that it's all intertwined with running and endurance. And I think, endurance sports, like the name speaks for itself. It's obviously you're physically enduring, but I think more than anything, it's that mental endurance that's required for a marathon or an Ironman or any kind of endurance event. And I think those are just such a good, there's such good metaphors for life. And I always like to think of it as like voluntary adversity. You voluntarily go out and do something really hard by choice, and you can get through it, and you learn how to overcome this really hard thing, and then you can take that new willpower that you have, and you can apply that for when real things in life come up, like a loved one gets cancer, or you happen to get cancer, and you're like, okay, well I've run a marathon, I've done this really hard physical event, and I figured out how to get through that. Like this thing in life, it's is really no different in my opinion. So I just really love that it's all intertwined within the world of running too.
No, no, you're spot on, man. I think so many people, and I mean, clearly, how do I put this? Because it's a double-edged sword. Like social media, I always try to say is you got to find the good in it, right? But there's a lot of
Right.
negative in it, right? And I think like the good in is it like groups people can reach a lot of people really quick in a positive way, but it also is a negative, right? Like is like there's like this negative perception, or there's like a lot of fakers, I say
Yeah.
fakers, but people they always show the good and not the. And I think for us again, the cancer's so negative, but to throw positives out there and not to say like, hey man, life's not always about positives because this shit knocks you down day in, day out, but you got to have that fortitude to get up. And the same thing with training, right? Like training for a marathon's not easy. Training for a 5K is not easy, man. If you want to like, if you have a goal in mind, whatever that goal in mind, whatever it is, like endurance wise, like there's work. You got to put in the work. And I think that's something, Jeremy, like as we talk about this and I look back, like that was just ingrained for me with my dad, like he and my mom, like they worked really hard to get here to the United States. They worked really hard to provide my brother and I with an amazing life. And they still worked really hard to provide our family with so many great things. Again, we didn't go to Disney World every day, every year. Be hard to go to every day, but we didn't go to Disney World every year, but like we had a great life, man. And I always feel like life is what you make out of it, and they worked really hard for that, and that's just like kind of life, man. Like there's no free lunches. I tell my kids all the time, like no one's gonna give you anything. Like there's
Yeah.
no free lunches, man. And people who think there are, just I don't know, man. I can't help you, I guess.
Yeah, I know one of the guys I coach for running, and he's got a big social media. He always says rent is due. Like every
Runs
single
too
day, you got to
every
show up.
day.
It gets reset every night while you're sleeping. You got to show up and pay your rent, pay your dues.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, man, it's such a powerful story. I love it, and again, I think the intertwining of it with running is it's just so perfect. I feel like it meshes really well. What are you guys like? Obviously, the goal of Project Purple is not only raising awareness. I know you guys do a lot of financial stuff as
Yeah.
well, like donating to research. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about like
Yeah.
what Project Purple does, kind of on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and these are two pillars that have been with us since day one. So when we started the charity, we wanted to help patients through that journey. And so we realized like we could do that. How do we do that? Like, what does that look like, right? And I go back to my personal experience. Like my dad had insurance, he had retirement. A lot of people don't, right? You just saw that every day. Like I give you that example. Like that guy had no support, right? And so we were like, hey, let's step in, let's help people financially because, the cost of cancer and, now fast forward 13 years, there was just a great article. I think it was like in the New York Times and it was talking about the toxicity of cancer care. And, I had a guy on our podcast, he kept every single bill and he goes, Dino, I'm alive today because I have great insurance. I'm like, Dan, what are you talking about? He's like, I kept every single bill. I paid $20,000 out of pocket. My total bills totaled 2.1 million.
Holy shit,
So he's like,
that's insane.
if I didn't have good insurance and a good job, I would be dead because insurance paid for, 95% of all my bills and I got great care. So like it's crazy, right? But this is the United States and it's a great country. It's not perfect. But if you don't have really good insurance, sometimes the quality of care or access to care really becomes an issue. So I saw that personally, like I said, being there with my dad, but
Yeah.
also realizing that my dad, again, he had good insurance, he had Medicaid, which was like secondary. So like we were good there, but other people aren't. So I said, hey, let's impact people in a positive way because This cancer is so negative and nasty. A lot of people, once they get sick, they can't work anymore because they're so sick, like from the treatments or the cancer itself. So how the hell are they going to keep their lights on? How are they going to put food on the table? So, we rolled out this patient financial aid program. Since inception, we've paid over $1 million. We've helped over 1,000 people nationwide. Anyone in the country
Wow.
who's battling can apply for it. This year was an exciting year because we actually evolved into providing food for patients. So now, if you live on the East Coast, we found a partner up in Boston, but they supply food from prepared, healthy, nutritious meals from Maine all the way down to Florida, as far west as Ohio. So we're excited now because nutrition is such an important piece of people battling cancer. But also, like, think about it, and this was comes back to a little bit about the patient financial aid program. I always said people should focus on getting better and spending time with the people they love the most. If you're sick and you got to work, you're not really doing that. And so, because you're focused on the, hey, I got to pay the bills. So that's, again, we come in and then trying to cook food and trying to go out and get food, again, takes time away from focusing on what people should be focusing during that time. I honestly feel, and this is like, in hopefully society, maybe we get to this, that everyone who gets sick with cancer, you should just get a reprieve. Like you get a reprieve from your bills, you get a reprieve from, cooking, doing all, and just focus on you getting better and fighting cancer and being with your loved ones. Imagine if, like, as a society, we did that for everyone. A, I think we'd have better outcomes, but two, I think we'd be a much better society, right? Like in terms of how people react. So that was kind of like a little bit of, why we do what we do on the patient financial aid side. And then the other program that's been with us since day one, it's really kind of heated up over the last couple of years because of the amount of money we've raised, is research. And we always knew from the very beginning, I knew looking at the numbers, like there was nothing being funded in research. And a lot of people don't know this, but excuse me, cancer research in the United States, 85% of it is funded by the government. So Uncle Sam supports the majority of
Oh,
cancer
wow.
research, which is great. It's good that they do that, don't get me wrong. But the bad thing is, like, if you look at pancreatic cancer, and I'm gonna compare it to breast cancer because that's what most people do. Not that I want to be like most people, but as I mentioned, my mom's a two-time breast cancer survivor, so she's alive today because of those advancements. Breast cancer is now, I think, there's about 350,000 people in the United States that get diagnosed with breast cancer, so it's a big number. They get about $1 billion from the government for basic research. Pancreatic cancer impacts about 65,000 people a year, so much less number, only gets about 125 million, but is the
Oh,
second
wow.
in most state in all of New England. Nationwide, it's the third leading killer of all major cancers. In New England, it's number two, and by 2030, which is not that far off here, and maybe even sooner, it will become the number two killer of all the major cancers. So a billion to 125 is a big spread. So that's the challenging piece. If 85% comes from that 125, that's not a lot of money. So now what happens is you rely on philanthropy, right? You rely on people and groups to fund a lot of the heavy research. And so we've been really invested in that since day one. But the first couple of years we were just trying to make money, be profitable, help a lot of patients. So really we didn't start donating until we donated a little bit in the very beginning, but it just wasn't the sums that we've been doing over the last 5 years. But now our research portfolio is over $3 million, kind of getting close to 4 million. So we're like at 3.5 right now
Wow.
with some of the recent grants that we've made. But a lot of the heavy lift, like in the last like 5 years, we've donated probably about 3 million of that number within the last 5 years, because that's really been our growth where we've kind of exceeded $1 million years and just have had really great participants and supporters of our mission over the last couple of years. It's really grown. And so the research, though, Jeremy, is really where we're trying to make an inroad in early detection, because we do know right now the sooner that people get diagnosed, the higher the odds of survivability and better quality of life. Unfortunately, right now, statistically, 75% are diagnosed stage 3 or greater, which is not a great statistic. So we're trying to change that, and trying to find and help researchers with early detection, finding new modalities, possibly, tests that, could be, a key towards early detection, or screening protocols. We've been heavily invested in like high risk screening, because there is a risk for people with genetics. Like that's the one thing I think that's really changed the game a bit in the last 5 years is genetics. Like a lot of people have, as science as a whole, this is not just pancreatic cancer, but we start to learn more and more about science and genes. There are certain cancers that come from genetic predispositions, and pancreatic cancer is one of them. It's a big enough percentage where I think people need to know their risk, I guess is the term I'll use. Anywhere between 5 and 10% of the cases in the United States come from some sort of genetic risk.
Mm.
So if you know your genetic markup or makeup, then I always, knowledge is power. Like that can be very powerful in getting screening and surveillance, so that when you go to your general practitioner, they're aware of this high risk. And, having a vague sign and symptom like lower back pain or diarrhea for 2 weeks, but having a higher risk for pancreatic cancer, that light bulb should go off and say, okay, let's investigate this further to make sure it's not pancreatic cancer.
Yeah. Have you been tested yourself now that you know your dad had it?
Yeah, so crazy story about that. So as I mentioned, my mom's a two-time breast cancer survivor. So my dad gets pancreatic cancer in 2008. They didn't do genetic testing then. This didn't become a mandate from the government, for pancreatic cancer until about 2019, 2020. With other cancers, though, that changed, right? Breast cancer, for example, genetics was a big piece going back about 10 years ago. So my mom gets re-diagnosed in 2016. When she was first diagnosed in 2001, they didn't offer genetic testing from an insurance standpoint. She would have had to pay like we would have had to pay like $5,000 out of pocket. So we didn't do it. So then 16 rolls around, and it was crazy, Jeremy, man. It was totally like, I'd gone through my mom in '01, which was like she wanted all these things done. They wouldn't do it. Like she wanted a double mastectomy. She wanted genetic testing. It was just the insurance said no. They said you could pay for it out of pocket. We just didn't have the money. That it would have, the surgery would have been 50,000, the genetic testing 5,000. We were just going to do that. 16 rolls around. They were like, hey, what do you want? You want genetic testing? You want a double mastectomy? You want reconstruction? My mom's like, I want this cancer out of me. Just take my boobs. I don't need reconstruction, but I want genetic testing. And they were like, yeah, we'll do that.
Wow.
My mom was stage 2. My dad was stage 2 when he was diagnosed. So it was just this whole different experience. So 2008 rolls around, 2018, and I get really sick. And at the time, it was recommended that I do genetic testing. Now, my mom had tested positive for a gene mutation. So we had known that she carried the gene, but we never knew my dad because it was so far back. And so I learned in 2018, in late 2018, that I do have a genetic marker that is linked to pancreatic cancer and other cancers. So
Mm.
my risk has now gone up. My risk stands at like 6.5%. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but for general population, which is like 0.03 to 6.5, that's a big
Yeah.
jump.
Wow. That's how often do you think about that? Like, did you change your lifestyle once you found that out? Like, I know you said
Uh,
lifestyle can be connected to this, but doing everything in your power to kind of avoid that.
so how did it change? Like I'm in a screening and surveillance program. Knowledge is power, so I do get screened every year. I'm, we're, when I go to the doctor, if there's something up, like I know, so like I've been kind of vigilant with that. My lifestyle, like I don't really drink alcohol anymore. I kind of gave that up personally about a year ago. And not that I was a big drinker, I just don't, I've, just have found I actually wear a whoop. So I have found like when I wear my whoop, like drinking alcohol, just like getting the red real quick and it doesn't work,
Yep.
which is kind of fascinating. I love wine. I'm not like a big drinker, but like I just like, and then I'm not trying to say like people who do like, hey, that do you, right? But so I have like, I think since I started running, always been really conscious of like what I'm eating, what I'm drinking. Not that I'm like like I love cheese, I love pasta, being Italian, right? And that doesn't sit well, right? Like sometimes dairy, just too much dairy. I love ice cream, but ice cream will rip me up, man. Like I know I'm lactose intolerant. I've never gotten tested, but my wife's always like, "Oh, eat those pills or drink lactate," and I'm like, nah, I'm not doing that. But so I think from overall perspective, I do watch what I eat. Like I'm not eat like I can't tell you the last time I've had like fast food. Like I just don't. I lately I've really tried to avoid eating out as much as possible, but sometimes it's hard when you're on the road as much as I am.
Right.
But just like anything else, you can make healthy choices when you're on the road, right? Like skip the heavy dinners and go with a salad with grilled chicken or grilled fish and dressing on the side kind of thing without any cheese. So you just have to be smart about like the choices you make. So I think to answer your question, like I just have like really been conscious about living a healthy lifestyle since I started Project Purple. Because, going back to those early days, like I didn't know, like, and then you start training, and I've done 10 marathons since, and I realized like early on, like that 2012 race, I didn't train, but then after I was like, all right, I want to get serious about this. Like, let's train for this right. And in training for that, like you have to drink water, you have to, have nutrition on the course, and you can't go out the night before and eat like shit food and then expect to like run 20 miles and not have to be in a porta potty like every 2 miles, right? Or, like you just have to be smart about it. Like if you want to achieve anything in life, and especially with endurance events, you have to like
Yeah.
I don't know many people who can eat and drink and then go out and crush marathons, and feel really good about themselves. Like they can, but they feel really
Right.
crappy.
Yep. Yeah, I think running is such a good way to like really find out how good you feel, if that kind of makes sense. Because it's like,
Yeah.
especially, I think anything, it's just like doing something consistently. Like say every day you run 5 miles. Most days you eat pretty good. Last night you had a cheeseburger and a glass of wine or something. You're gonna feel it during that 5 miles
Correct.
because you're getting that consistent routine. And I feel like just adopting some healthy lifestyle like running or some healthy habit. It's like it kind of bleeds into everything else in your life because if you want to do it and continue doing it, you have to make those other changes too. And the alcohol thing is really interesting as well. Like I personally don't drink at all anymore, and it was honestly it's hard like going out with friends or something because everybody drinks, and if you don't drink, you're that one weirdo who doesn't
Yeah.
drink. They're like, "What's wrong with you? Like, you think you're better than us?" It's always that kind of thing, and it's really sad because alcohol is just poison, obviously, and it doesn't really give a lot to you outside of like the social aspect to it, and yeah, it's just so widely accepted by people that if you don't do it, you're kind of an outcast.
Yeah, there's a stigma, right? And it's just like
Yeah.
any big business, right? There's billions of dollars generated from that, right? So every movie, every commercial, it always looks really cool, right? And now you've got
Yeah.
all these celebrities and endorsements, of all their own lines. So, now it's cool and hip to be like The Rock and drink his like tequila, but like at the end of the day, like I wonder how much tequila The Rock really drink. Well, he's on some other stuff, so he can get away with that. But like so, yeah, I just and again, everyone does themselves, but to your point, like I've just have realized like, from a analytics standpoint, through Whoop, and then also from, a cancer standpoint, if you look at the data, like drinking large amounts of alcohol, like you're just rolling the dice, man. Like you're just eventually like that's gonna catch up to you, man. And
Yeah.
whether you want to be here and avoid cancer risk, or you just want to live a healthy lifestyle and achieve certain goals, like having lots, like significant amounts of alcohol, just it doesn't work.
Like for your lifestyle and how you take care of yourself now that you have a wife and family, and like obviously selfishly you want to take care of yourself, but selflessly you've got other people depending on you too.
Yeah, I mean, I think my wife's super active, my kids are active, so I think it has become part of our lifestyle, right? And clearly when you see a loved one die of cancer, regardless of what the cancer may be, I think for us it became natural, right? And that wasn't, and before though, our lifestyle wasn't like that either though. It wasn't like we were going to McDonald's all the time. Like it does bother me now. My youngest son who's 18 like loves McDonald's, and I'm like, dude, like that stuff's like bad for you, man. And he's a big athlete, like he's varsity soccer, varsity basketball, wants to play in college. I mean, I guess like 18, but he's super thin. He works out all the time. He's burning, probably 2,000 calories a day, working out, doing his sports. So, I guess I'm just tossing it up saying, hey, and I just always tell him like, just make better choices. And I kind of say, to answer your question, kind of try to lead by example, right? Like my wife and I have
Right.
always been super active, again, playing collegiate sports. I got really heavy into like working out during college, post college, still do that. My wife still works out regularly. I think, clearly having kids, kind of derails women a bit, for some, just because of complications and stuff. And we ran through that with both of her pregnancies, I should say, which she had to kind of take a step back from working out day in, day out. But I think it's just been part of our lifestyle. And I think part of that's also my upbringing. Like, we didn't have the opportunity to eat fast food. Like, again, I go back to like my mom. Like, I think the first time I like literally had like McDonald's was like senior in high school or something, just because we were hanging
Oh
out.
wow.
Or it was like some sort of a treat, right? Like it wasn't like now, like I know people like they bring their kids like every week to McDonald's, and I'm like, yo, like stuff's not even real food. So like for us just growing up, like that just wasn't the norm. Like we didn't go out to dinner a lot. Like it was just like family dinners around the table with the family, whether it was extended family or immediate family, like that was just what we did.
No, that's cool. I do my childhood. We it was fast food probably not once a day, but nearly every day. It was yeah. It
It
is what
is
it
what it
is.
is,
I've
yeah.
learned. I've since learned my lesson. But so all the funding that Project Purple brings in now, where does the majority of that come from? Is it like individual donors? People donating a couple $1,000s here or there. Is it from the marathons, or where does all that come from?
Right now, like majority is our peer-to-peer program, which is our endurance program. Probably 75% this year will come from that. The
Okay.
other part, and I throw everything into endurance. So 5Ks, marathons, golf outing. We even did an urban rappel series this year. Anything in that space, and we have other people doing like their own run walks in their own communities and stuff. And then probably the other 25% comes from like major gifts, I guess you would say, just families that have um, lost loved ones that have donated to us. We also have a couple of corporations that have lost, executives that have, in made Project Purple, a beneficiary of whether it's been a product sale or just a, an annual giving type thing, like where, they're making a gift in memory of so and so. And that it's good, and it's good to diversify, like, and that's something that we've been trying to do over the years, is just diversify our income streams, because clearly during COVID no one was doing
Yeah.
any type of community gathering. There were endurance events happening, but it was all virtual, which we evolved into. And we still do a fair amount of virtual endurance events, but it's clearly kind of leveled off from where the highs were in 2020.
That's awesome. What if somebody wants to get involved with Project Purple, whether donate or run for you guys during a marathon, or have them, or have you guys like at their race? What would that process kind of look like? What's the best way to go about
Best
that?
place is go to our website, projectpurple.org, or follow us on social media. I mean, as I mentioned before, we're one of the few charities in the world, in the five largest world marathons. And so, but we do a lot of endurance stuff. Again, as I like to use the term, we're in a lot of other domestic races. We actually might be adding another international race as well. So, the website, social media is the best place. We even have a program. So like, hey, like if you want to run Austin and you don't see it on the list, you can do that via our Pioneer program. And that's become a program that's continuing to grow year over year, because clearly we're not going to be in every race as an official charity partner, but that doesn't stop someone from running for our mission. If you love what we do, or you're connected, just by like running, and not necessarily connected to disease, but think it's a great mission and think it's a great idea to do it, find a race that's local to you, and you could still be part of the Project Purple community. We still support you. We still provide all the resources that we have here, from fundraising to training to gear, and all the support from a marketing perspective to help you be the best fundraiser you can be.
That's awesome. And I'll add this plug in there too, because I'm running for you guys for
Yeah,
London, and I'll put my link down in the description of the podcast if anybody wants to donate through my link specifically.
absolutely.
$5, $10, whatever, anything helps. It sounds like. What's kind of the ultimate goal and like the grand vision for Project Purple? Say like 10 years, 20 years down the line, if you guys have one.
Yeah, I don't. So that's the first answer to that question. But I think, for us, like the job's not done until we've helped move the needle in survivability, right? And so what does that look like? Is that 50%? Is that 60%? I don't know. I don't think we'll ever cure cancer. I think we got to get to a place where we can help manage it and give people more time and higher quality of life. So if we can achieve that, hopefully in the next 10 years, I don't foresee this like something I want to hand off to my kids. Um, but in terms of goals, because we are goal centric here, like we want to be a leader in the endurance space, like in terms of marathoning. And I think, we already are a leader in the pancreatic cancer space. We're the biggest pancreatic cancer group. I mean, in terms of marathoning, yeah, we're not the largest in terms of dollars raised or like staffing or anything like that. But when you look at like marathoning, and we've been doing this since day one, right? Like we've been in the New York City Marathon since 2012, Chicago 2014, Boston 2014, and then London and Berlin, which are the five biggest since 2020. Actually, yeah, 2020. And we have some other races like Twin Cities. We've been there since 14, Grandma's since 16. So when you look at marathoning as a whole, the players in that space, in particular pancreatic cancer, we've been doing it longer than any of these other groups. But now the other groups are getting in, which is great. It's great flattery. I always used to complain because I know all the leadership teams at all the other groups is like, hey, I go to New York and there's 9 breast cancer groups and there's 1 pancreatic cancer group. So, if we really want to make impact, we've got to inspire, we've got to raise a lot of awareness, and we've got to get people engaged and involved. So, where we see ourselves in, 10 years is just continuing to be a leader, not only in our space, but as a charity endurance program in the entire charity landscape. So that puts us up there with, Team in Training, American Cancer Society, St. Jude's, a lot of the programs that I look up to that have been at this a lot longer than we have, and have, hundreds of staff. But, I always say, like, we go to New York, and, this past year was our first year, our New York team, first time ever that a team raised over $500,000. And we did it with 63
Wow.
runners. So we had 63 runners raise 500. Right now it's like 515,000. We still have some matches coming in, so that'll probably
Dang.
grow a little bit. So pound for pound, like I would put us up against any of the big major charities because, our runners are super passionate and they just do an amazing job. And, I'll leave you on this note. What we've done and what we've become, yeah, I've been driving the bus, but it's about our participants, about our runners. So I always say, without them, we don't get to do the things we do. I always said from the very beginning, I knew we had to get people involved because I didn't have a big Rolodex. I didn't come from money. Like I was blessed that I had my own insurance brokerage, and was able to kind of take a step back, but we had to get other people involved. And I think that's like, again, brings it full circle to the running, like how positive that is and be able to share that with other people is just really, really cool. And people have drank the Kool-Aid, man, because if you're listening to this or watching, you know how great running is, right? And then now cap that on, to try to run for a cure for pancreatic cancer, man, like that's like mind blowing.
I love that, man. I'm so excited to be a part of it as well, and be able to, become more a part of Project Purple, from my side of things too. And I love what you guys are doing, and just thank you for coming on. And oh, sorry, my dog's bumping the camera. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story and sharing the Project Purple story and yeah, the whole story with your dad and everything. So really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this with us. Again, where's the best place to, if anybody wants to connect with you personally, and then if anybody wants to again run for Project Purple?
Yeah, I guess for me personally, I mean, there's two ways. The only platform I'm pretty active on is Instagram. I guess that's like the only platform that's left. I am on X. I don't post as much on X, and Facebook is just really more for just family and friends, honestly. But Instagram is my public. It's Dino Project Purple, and it's pretty easy to remember. If anyone's out there that wants to reach out and talk to me, email's really easy. It's dino@projectpurple.org, O-R-G. And I'm always open to talking to people touched by this disease, because there's strength in numbers, and we truly believe in that. So the more people we can touch, the more positive impacts we can have, and hopefully the people that go through this vicious cancer have a much happier landing, than like my dad.
I love that, man. I think you're doing some huge things, obviously, and really making a positive impact on the world. And hopefully, continue moving that needle and raising more and more awareness for pancreatic cancer and just cancer in general. So I love what you're doing, man, and thank you again for coming on. And I'm stoked to be a part of this with you guys for London.
I can't wait, man. Can't wait to be cheering you on the streets of London.
Heck yeah. Are you running London? Are you going to be out there?
I will be out there. I don't think I'm running. I'm still coming off an Achilles injury, and I don't think I'm just ready yet. So I don't want
Right.
to. I don't want to start that build up and then have to bag, on London. I'd rather maybe pick
Right.
like a local race or another race that I have not as much of like, all right, if I don't do the South Norwalk Marathon, because my injury flares up again, I won't be as pissed if
Right.
it's London, right? It's a bigger deal. So I'm
I
gonna try to
love it.
recoup the next 6 months. I'm just gonna try to get really, really dial in my rehab and my training, get a lot stronger, and then hopefully 2025 I'll be back in London to run it.
Beautiful. You can just stick to the pool for now, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, man. We'll see you later.
All right, thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you in the next one.